Lovely stuff. So one of the things that struck me in episode 1 is you talking about...
Sorry, have you watched it?
I have.
What do you think of it?
Really enjoyed it. I thought it was really direct, which is what I really appreciated about it, especially it kind of hit you immediately. Some of the messages that came through, I thought it was really honest to begin with, and I think that was quite refreshing to see.
Good.
You know, one of the things that I think you mentioned in that episode is how frustrating it is that we keep having these conversations again and again. Sitting here today, are you still feeling that way, having made this documentary?
Well, yeah, because it hasn't aired yet, so once it airs, you hope that the ball starts rolling. And I think that one of the key things about making this film was that I didn't want to make something just for the sake of making it and highlighting the issues. I wanted to make something that we could maybe start implementing some tangible change. By no means sitting here saying we're going to change the face of racism or sexuality or mental health, but if we can move the dial a little bit and start that conversation and start the ball rolling in the right direction to have positive outcomes, then this has definitely been a success in that sense. This will remain to be seen. But what I would say, we're now having conversations at board level with the Premier League, which is a step in the right direction, because before filming this and before going through this process, that option to go into the boardroom and speak and be heard and be valued was not on the table. So, and it's not about just me going there, by the way. It's about me opening that door and bringing in current players, bringing in some ex-players to lead the charge.
That's something you mentioned in the documentary as well, the special importance of current players having their voices heard and leading that charge. Why is it so important that it's them leading it?
Because I'm not current. I'm not now. I'm not in the corridors of the training grounds. I'm not in that environment anymore on a day-to-day basis. Yes, I go and I speak and I see and I interview and whatnot, and I speak to offline with a lot of players that are currently playing, and many of them are still my friends. But these guys are living and breathing it every day. If there's something that happens, they know the temperature immediately, so they need to be the ones with their feet under the table when there's decisions being made on the game that we all love.
And unfortunately, it does seem like sometimes maybe those social media companies might listen to players more than, you know, fans or supporters or even the government. Would you say that's true, that there's a certain sense of influence that players have that no one else can really have? Yeah,
and I think the players understanding that is the key part of this, and I think that's what we try to do as well. That the players coming together. That's why we went to LA, to speak to people in LA that have experienced this and been through this as well. And you see the influence and the importance of togetherness with the current and prominent players and the people that are involved in the game. When the players say something or aren't happy with something, they speak up and they move together. And that togetherness, I think, is so vital, and it's something that we can definitely learn as a sport from the Americans, the NBA especially I'm talking about, the likes of LeBron James, Chris Paul, etc. These guys, they have such influence and impact that the players over here need to understand that is possible. But it's difficult, and I understand the difficulties, and it's been difficult for us on this journey of filming to get players to open up, to get agents to speak, agents being really hesitant and saying, no, we don't want our players to speak, we don't want to be seen as just the victims, or what's going to come out of this? Where's this going to go? We've seen far too often that these incidents arise and come out and happen, and nothing changes for our players. So I understand that why some of the people that are involved in the game don't want to come forward and don't want to speak. But hopefully this film will show why you should, and show the impact when you do speak. The likes of Wilfried Zaha, Akinfenwa, Romelu Lukaku, etc. The players, Josh, Chris, Colin. I'm joking, Colin. The guys that have come out in recent times and spoken about their situation, their sexuality. The positive impact that does have, and the influence it does have, is immeasurable.
The World Cup was brought up a couple of times in episode 1 as well. The online safety bill, the harm bill, has not yet passed through based on what's happening in the government as well right now. Are we underprepared? Has anything changed ahead of Qatar?
From a legislation point of view?
Or from a racism standpoint, you know, the players going now, they're on a bigger stage in the Euros and they're potentially facing this again. Do you think it will happen again?
I honestly think that it probably will happen again. I just think that the social media companies haven't done enough or anything really to move the dial for a player to go, oh, I feel protected now. The legislation's not in place, so that's not going to help them. So the players definitely must be sitting there thinking, well, I'm at the mercy of somebody's kind of ignorance. If they decide to come out and spout all of this abuse during the World Cup after a situation that arises in a game, I've got no protection. And the process actually after that happens, of that person being prosecuted, is clunky, is slow. Will those people be punished in the right way? Well, the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? And so the players, that's where I understand the players' lack of trust for the authorities, lack of belief for the authorities, and that's why I think it's such a powerful film that we've made here in highlighting the issues, but also highlighting where we can go to change that.
And how difficult for that as a player? You know, the World Cup is maybe your dream, representing England in a World Cup, and having that in the background other than being able to focus on winning matches.
Yeah, it's unfair, and I don't think it's just English players. I think it's players of colour from all over the world who'll be thinking this, and because that news wasn't just UK, it was worldwide news. And so for a player to be going on the pitch and thinking, if I make a mistake, I could be racially abused. Like, that's real. And in today's day and age, should that be the case? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be in any day and age. But you'd think that we'd have made steps forward to come forward from this. But again, the intentions and the values of the social media platforms are there for all to see. They're not willing to change because they know that these type of behaviours and toxic behaviours and hate behaviours on social media platforms drives revenue. So they're not going to change, it seems to me, at the moment.
One of the things that struck me is you talking a lot about campaigns and how, you know, you get to the end of a campaign and then it's dropped and that's the end of it. If you were looking at kind of action points coming out of what you've learned from these 3 different scenarios and 3 different episodes, what are kind of the top priorities that you want to see in terms of action points from here on forward once this is released?
I think understanding allyship, players coming together and being very unified in their approach to combat these topics. And when you're a unit and you're together approaching these topics and going to the stakeholders in the game, they can't not listen. If I'm going to them on my own, they can brush me aside. If one player, no matter how much of a following you've got, goes on his own, you can brush it aside, you can appease that, you can get rid of it after. It's a bit of noise that doesn't really bang too loud for too long. But if you're together and you come as a unified approach and a unified group, you have a real opportunity to shake the cage, and people then have to start listening and know that you're serious and you're not going to go away. So I think that is one of the key things that came out of this for me.
You were talking to Eni Luco about some of the things that the NBA and also the WNBA have done. You can see with Brittany Griner lately as well. Do you think that potentially English players, English athletes need to be a little bit more maybe proactive or a little bit more assertive in some of the actions they're taking? Yeah, but also they're disheartened. I understand from the current players as well. They don't see enough movement when things go wrong. They don't see enough support. They don't see enough even empathy and compassion sometimes for when they're on the receiving end of some of these things. So I understand the pushback from the players to say, well, if nothing's going to happen, why have I got to have the energy to do this? But that is the wrong way. But at the same time, I do understand it, and that goes back to my point about if you approach this together, then you have a good opportunity to change things, and you have a good chance to. It's not all on one person. It's not the stress and the pressures on that one person. You can alleviate that pressure over a group of people to really go in there and make people listen. Because the people have to listen. Like I said, you mentioned there about tokenism and just gestures through slogans and campaigns. Like, that's not good enough. But the group have to make the people aware that are sanctioning these these gestures, that this isn't right. There needs to be more, not something tangible, that's long-lasting and sustainable. Is that WhatsApp group still going? Yep. And what are some of the main topics of conversation these days in that group? Well, I think it's things like going to the boardroom and board meetings at the Premier League is a big step in the right direction, but that's the first step. You need to see, are we being able to have the impact now? And like I said, it's about me knocking that door. The door's been answered. I'm getting my foot through that door. Now it's about bringing
people out of that WhatsApp group through that door on that journey as well.
Lastly, it seems like a lot of this, you don't see this potentially as much in women's football. It does seem like a problem that stems quite young, with young men. How do you get in early enough to change those attitudes? Because you've had, as you said in the documentary, you've had households that just say, this is fine.
About what aspect?
How do you, is it education for younger men when you start to see
but when you mention the women, do you mean like with sexuality or race?
Potentially sexuality, more so. I think, they're more out players in the WSL than in the Premier League. But when it comes to homophobia, when it comes to racism, it does seem like young men are active on social media, 12, 13, attacking these players. How do you tackle that when they're that young?
Education. I think the curriculum has to play a role. Some of these young players, or some young people, maybe their families are racist, or their network of friends, there's racism in there. If these young people aren't equipped with education to be able to combat that or push back on some of those opinions, then they're never going to change it. They're going to just morph into those people. So education, that's why football isn't going to change everything, but it starts that ball rolling, I believe. But the education has to be running alongside that, or if not in front of that, to really allow us to have that impact going forward with the next generation of young people.
Lastly, from all three of these episodes, you're tackling really difficult things, you're having really difficult conversations, but having made this project, are you feeling more optimistic or pessimistic about the state of things?
I'm hopeful. Again, I'm not naive enough to think that we've done this documentary and we're going to rewrite the rule book and everything's going to change for positive. I didn't go into this expecting that. You'd like to have some sort of good impact in the right way. But all I can say at the moment, listen, once the film drops and goes out, I think then we hopefully see some positive stuff come off the back of that. But since filming with certain stakeholders in the game, there has been a more willingness to speak and to be open to discussions surrounding these topics, which can only be seen as positive.